War used to be fought with shields. Now, it's just a button away. Today, when we think of war, images of drones gliding silently across the sky, missiles launched with a single digital command, and invisible hacker attacks come to mind. Bringing down a nation's power grid or paralyzing its communications can now be as devastating as a battle fought with tanks and soldiers. But if we step back into history, we realize this invisible face of war is a very recent transformation. Because 2,500 years ago, war looked completely different. Back then, war meant raising your shield, lowering your spear, and standing face to face with the enemy. A few hundred or a few thousand men collided, and victory was decided not by technology but by discipline and courage. The clash of bronze shields, the grind of spears, and the synchronized marching of feet, that was the entire soundscape of war. The story of humanity is, in many ways, the story of war. Civilizations rose, empires collapsed, cities were built and burned, and behind it all were the dynamics shaped by conflict. War didn't just decide borders, it rewrote the future of technology. From ironworking to gunpowder, from steam engines to cyber networks, so many of humanity's greatest innovations were born first for the battlefield. And perhaps the most striking truth is this: if we want to understand how humans organized themselves, how leaders gained power, and how societies were built, we need to look first at how they fought their wars. Because war has always been humanity's darkest invention and its most transformative force. So let's begin. From the stone arenas of the ancient world to the digital battlefields of today, the evolution of war. In the ancient world, war was not fought with satellites, drones, or cyber attacks. It was fought face to face. An ordinary soldier stepped onto the battlefield carrying only a spear, a sword, a bow, and a shield. Yet behind these simple weapons lay an extraordinary discipline and the birth of organized military strategy. Take the famous Greek phalanx formation. Soldiers lined up shoulder to shoulder, their shields overlapping. Each shield didn't just protect the man who carried it, it also protected the comrade next to him. The result was not a line of individuals, but a single living wall of men in bronze. In this formation, heroism wasn't about charging forward alone, it was about holding the line together. If even one soldier lowered his shield, the entire wall could collapse. The Romans perfected this principle with the legendary testudo, or tortoise formation. The front line angled their shields forward, while those in the middle lifted theirs overhead. From the outside, it looked like an armored shell crawling across the battlefield. Arrows, stones, even flaming projectiles bounced harmlessly off. In sieges and open combat alike, this tactic made the Roman legions nearly unstoppable. What's striking about ancient warfare is how little it depended on technology, and how much it relied on the human body and collective discipline. The outcome of a battle often hinged on whether a soldier raised his spear at the right moment, or angled his shield correctly against a blow. Victory wasn't determined by who had the deadliest weapon, but by who stood in formation longest without breaking. And that discipline didn't just win battles, it shaped entire civilizations. The order of the phalanx and the tortoise mirrored the order of the societies that built them. Ancient Greece and Rome didn't just conquer territories with these tactics, they reshaped the course of history itself. By the Middle Ages, the heart of warfare had shifted. It was no longer about clashing armies in the open, but about taking or defending castles. A kingdom's strength was measured not only by the size of its army, but by the power of its fortresses. Castles became both the symbol of a ruler's authority and the ultimate refuge for the people. And so, the defining stage of medieval warfare was the siege. Siege warfare was as much a test of engineering as of courage. When an enemy army arrived at the walls of a fortress, their first challenge was figuring out how to breach those massive stone defenses. That's when the great war machines of the Middle Ages came into play. Catapults, battering rams, and most fearsome of all, the trebuchet. The catapult used tension to hurl stones or flaming projectiles into the fortress, damaging walls or setting buildings ablaze. But the trebuchet was something else entirely. Powered by counterweights, it could launch stones weighing hundreds of kilos with terrifying force. Chronicles tell of trebuchets flinging not just rocks but even diseased animal carcasses to spread plague inside the walls. A single well-aimed shot could alter the fate of an entire castle. Defenders, of course, didn't remain passive. Castle walls grew taller and thicker, Deep moats were dug to prevent siege towers and battering rams from reaching the gates. From the ramparts, defenders poured boiling water, hot oil, or burning pitch onto attackers below. Medieval architecture itself became a weapon. One striking detail is the spiral staircases built inside castles. Most turned clockwise. Why? Because defenders descending the stairs could swing their swords freely with their right hand, while attackers climbing upward found their sword arms cramped against the inner wall. Even staircases became part of the battlefield, and sieges were not short affairs. Many lasted months, some even years. Starvation, disease, and despair often killed more soldiers than arrows or blades. A siege tested not only the strength of stone walls, but the endurance of human will. The lesson of the Middle Ages was clear. Victory was no longer won solely by bravery. It depended on the ingenuity of engineers and the endurance of entire societies. Medieval warfare marked the turning point when war became increasingly technical, methodical, and devastating. In the 15th century, a force appeared that would rewrite the rules of battle forever: gunpowder. The arrival of gunpowder in Europe marked a turning point in military history. For the first time, war was no longer decided by the strength of human muscle or the ingenuity of massive wooden machines. It was now governed by fire, chemistry, and explosive power. The earliest firearms were crude and unreliable. Iron barrels often burst, killing the very soldiers meant to wield them. But quickly, cannons and muskets improved, and with them, the medieval order collapsed. The proud armored knight, once the undisputed master of the battlefield, was suddenly obsolete. No matter how thick his armor, a single musket ball could bring him down. Military historians sometimes call this moment the death of the hero, when individual courage gave way to the supremacy of firepower. Victory was no longer about who had the best archer, but who had the most guns and the heaviest cannons. The impact of gunpowder was felt most dramatically in the fall of castles. Fortresses that had stood for centuries, thought to be impenetrable, crumbled under sustained cannon fire. In response, military architects reinvented fortifications. The star-shaped bastion was born, low, thick walls angled to deflect cannonballs, surrounded by deep moats. Medieval towers gave way to geometric fortress cities designed to resist the thunder of artillery. Gunpowder also transformed the organization of armies. No longer could war rely on heroic charges or duels. Instead, armies fought in disciplined lines of fire. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, firing their muskets in volleys at the command of their officers. The synchronized roar of gunfire not only devastated enemies, but also shattered their morale. The gunpowder revolution didn't just change weapons, it changed societies. Nobility lost its battlefield supremacy as common soldiers armed with muskets became the backbone of armies. The age of knights ended, and the age of modern armies began. War had become louder, smokier, and deadlier than ever before. The Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and 19th centuries didn't just reshape factories, cities, and commerce. It fundamentally changed the nature of war. Conflict was no longer decided by manpower alone. Victory now depended on industrial capacity. The nation with the most factories, the fastest production lines, and the densest railway networks had the advantage. The first great shift was the mass production of weapons. For centuries, swords, muskets, and cannons had been crafted individually by skilled hands. But now factories could produce thousands of identical rifles, bayonets, and artillery pieces. Armies became standardized, and their power multiplied not just by numbers but by industry. A nation's military strength was no longer measured only by its soldiers, but by the speed of its factories. Transportation also revolutionized war. Railroads turned logistics into a weapon. What once took armies weeks or months to march could now be done in days. Soldiers, ammunition, and supplies could be rushed to the front with unprecedented speed. Battles were no longer won only on the field, but in the railway stations that fed them. Then came the weapon that truly defined the century, the machine gun. A handful of men operating one could mow down hundreds of enemies in minutes. Where once you needed rows of archers, a single gun emplacement could hold an entire front. The scale of killing skyrocketed. In colonial wars, European empires wielded these weapons to devastating effect, conquering vast territories with frightening ease. Artillery, too, grew more powerful. Cannons became longer-ranged, more accurate, and more destructive. For the first time, cities miles away from the battlefield could feel the thunder of war. Civilians could no longer assume safety behind distant walls. At the same time, the rise of the nation-state transformed the human side of war. No longer were battles just contests between kings and mercenaries. With the spread of conscription and the surge of nationalism, millions of ordinary citizens were drawn into military service. War became a collective experience, a struggle fought by entire peoples rather than small professional armies. The 19th century proved a crucial lesson. Heroism and courage mattered less than factories and supply chains. War had become industrial, mechanized, and terrifyingly efficient. The smoke rising from factory chimneys mattered just as much as the smoke rising from cannons. By the 19th century, war had become industrial. But in the 20th century, it escalated into something far darker, war on a scale that could annihilate humanity itself. This century witnessed the bloodiest and most destructive conflicts in all of human history. World War I was the first true industrial slaughter. Along hundreds of miles of trenches across Europe, millions of soldiers lived and died in mud, poison gas, and the relentless rattle of machine guns. For the first time, chemical warfare scarred the battlefield. Men returned blind, burned, or permanently disfigured. War was no longer just about killing. It was about breaking the human body in new and horrific ways. Modern war had revealed its brutal face. But the true breaking point came with World War II. Tanks thundered across continents. Bombers turned cities into firestorms, and naval fleets clashed on a global scale. For the first time, civilians were not bystanders. They were targets. London under the Blitz, Dresden in flames, the atomic shadows of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The line between battlefield and home vanished. World War II also demonstrated how quickly science could become weaponized. Radar, code-breaking machines, jet engines, and ballistic missiles all emerged from the laboratories of war. And then came the most devastating invention in human history, the atomic bomb. In 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not just destroyed. They marked the moment humanity gained the power to destroy itself. In the 20th century, war became total war. Entire societies mobilized. Soldiers fought on the front lines, but factory workers, farmers, women, and children sustained the war effort from behind the lines. A nation's survival depended not only on its army, but on its people's capacity to endure and produce. The century left humanity with a chilling lesson. War was no longer just a contest of borders, but a threat to civilization itself. From the rumble of tanks to the wail of air raid sirens, from the staccato of machine guns to the mushroom clouds of nuclear bombs, the 20th century forced mankind to face the terrifying possibility of its own destruction. In the 21st century, war is no longer confined to land, sea, or sky. One of its most dangerous new frontiers is the digital world. Today, you don't need to send an army to cripple a nation. With a few lines of code, you can shut down its power grid, freeze its banking system, or silence its communication networks. Cyberattacks have become some of the quietest, yet most devastating weapons of modern conflict. Above our heads, the skies are no longer dominated only by manned aircraft, but by unmanned drones. These machines can be piloted from thousands of miles away, silently hovering until the moment they strike with pinpoint precision. Drone warfare reduces the risk for soldiers, but it also lowers the threshold for conflict. Launching a drone strike is far easier than sending tens of thousands of troops into battle. Then there is the rise of artificial intelligence. Algorithms now analyze enemy movements, select targets, and even attempt to predict the flow of battle. Decisions that once rested in human hands are increasingly being delegated to machines. This raises unsettling questions about accountability, morality, and control when it comes to life and death decisions. Modern war is now fought on multiple levels at once. Tanks may still roll across battlefields, but above them drones circle, while in cyberspace hackers wage invisible battles. War has become a multi-layered chess game, with some of the pieces moved by humans and others by machines. And yet, beneath all the technological advances, the essence of war has not changed. It is still a struggle fought at the cost of human lives. The difference is that alongside the rattle of gunfire, we now hear the clicks of keyboards. Alongside the roar of missiles, the blinking of server lights. The war of the 21st century looks less like a battle of nations and more like a battle of technologies. Which leaves us with an unsettling question: will machines one day fight wars entirely on their own? And when that day comes, will humans still be the masters of war or its victims? From spears to catapults, from gunpowder smoke to machine guns, From nuclear fire to today's cyber attacks, war has always been both humanity's greatest destruction and its driving force for change. Many of the tools we now use in daily life were first forged for battle: ironworking, railroads, satellites, even the internet. Yet no matter how technology advanced, the cost of war remained the same. Countless lives lost, cities destroyed, stories left unfinished. Now the future of war feels more uncertain than ever. Drones, AI, and cyber weapons are pulling humans away from the battlefield. But the real question is, will tomorrow's wars be fought by us or by the machines we've created? What do you think? Will the next century's wars be fully digital? Or will humans still face each other on the battlefield?